Morning all, it's 10 o'clock, so let's kick off. Thank you very much. Welcome to you all. It's good to see you all your faces. I hope you are, and you and yours are all well, despite these incredibly difficult times that we are in at the moment. And just thank you for all the work to the officers that have contributed to this meeting. I know there's a huge amount of paperwork. There's a huge amount we need to get through today. So we will have a short break at some point, but thank you all very much. I'd like to welcome Chris Brodie to the board, who's the chair of SELEP, and who will be joining us for the discussions. So he's been asked by the strategic board specifically to kind of look at and have visibility over the programme and the high-risk projects, and seek reassurances that we will be delivering what we need to deliver, and that we've promised the government that we will deliver as a board. So Chris, welcome. You are very welcome to contribute to the discussions, but as per normal, only the local authority members will vote. So if I could ask board members to introduce themselves, as there are members of the public here. And just to remind you that the normal rules of engagement apply to Zoom, so please turn your microphones on mute. If you're not speaking, please raise your hands, either virtually or physically, so that I can see you if you wish to speak. But if we could all go around and introduce ourselves, I'm going to go around the room and just say, so Councillor Gledhill.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Rob Gledhill and I'm leader of Thurrock Council.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, good morning everybody. I'm Councillor Ron Woodley, Deputy Leader of Southend-on-Sea Borough Council.
Thank you. Councillor Simons. I think you might be on mute. We'll come back to Councillor Simons in a minute. Simon.
Morning everybody, Simon Cook, FE and Skills Representative on the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Goff.
Morning, Roger Goff, Leader of Kent County Council.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Rodney Chambers, Medway Council.
Thank you. Councillor Finch.
And David Finch, Leader of Essex County Council.
And Rosemary.
Rosemary Nunn, Head of Commercialisation Innovation, University of Greenwich.
And then hopefully Councillor Simmons, are you there to? Thank you.
This is Councillor Rupert Simmons speaking. I'm the lead member for the economy and the cabinet at the East Sussex County Council. And I carry with me apologies from the leader, Keith Glazier, who's unwell at this point.
I am sorry to hear that. Please do send him our get well wishes.
I most certainly will, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Okay. So just to remind you that this meeting is recorded, as you know, and that we obviously post the details of this meeting up on the SELEP website afterwards. Rhiannon, do we have any other apologies at all? I think we've got a full house.
No, that's everyone.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move straight on then to item 2 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November 2020. Is everybody happy and believe those are correct records?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, declarations of interest. I'd just like to ask for any declarations of interest made by to be made by members in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct. Any declarations? Nope. Great. Okay, and then so item 4, public questions. We haven't actually received any public questions. However, we have received some email correspondence from members of the public raising concern about the lack of progress on the Queensway Gateway project. So we are expecting a question at the next meeting of the Accountability Board, but whatever happens, I would like to ask that we have an update from East Sussex County Council at the next meeting on this project, please. So just to record that.
Yes,
There is also some information you've received from the public, which comes up on a later item as well. Thank you.
We
Okay.
are very happy to comply with that request.
Thank you very much. Great. So that'll be in the March meeting. Okay, let's move swiftly on then to item 5, please. So that's the Local Growth Fund Capital Programme update. And Rhiannon's going to provide us with a bit of an update here. I would, before we do that, just like to draw your attention to, there's around £94.388 million spend forecast that is going to be spent beyond the growth deal period. So, you know, there are some considerable things that we need to be careful about, that we need to ensure that we are delivering on the projects, and we need to think about that when we look at all of that in terms of due process. Rhiannon.
Great, thank you, Chair. So just initially, just to provide some context around the decisions today, this first paper sets out the overall position of the programme in terms of spend and risk position. We then go through the next few agenda items where we look at some additional funding decisions to projects and consider some specific high risk projects, so those considered in turn. And then we'll get onto a decision paper that sets out the total amount of local growth fund that we're looking then to transfer to local authorities at the end of this financial year. So there's an intentional flow there, so we can make sure we're carefully considering these high risk projects before we then move on to this decision around transferring that funding over to local authorities at the end of this year. In terms of the actual local growth fund update, so we've shown quite a substantial reduction in the amount of spend during this financial year. So that's reduced by £55.6 million from an original forecast of 128 million down to £73 million. I don't think that's completely unexpected given the pandemic and the consequences there on progress and across our programme, but it does mean an increase in the amount of spend beyond the growth deal. So as Chair said, we're currently forecasting £94 million spend beyond the growth deal. And that's split between funding that we've received from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and they want to see that funding spent within this financial year. And in addition, we've got funding from the Department of Transport that is ring-fenced against specific projects where we're proposing that actually SELEP holds that funding before being transferred to local authorities in line with the project spend forecasts. In terms of projects going beyond the date, so the Strategic Board has previously agreed a 6-month extension of the growth deal. So whilst government's technical deadline is 31st of March 2021, the Strategic Board previously agreed a 6-month extension to that, recognising the impact of COVID. So any project going beyond that 6-month extension requires approval from this board and the Strategic Board that they're comfortable with any spend going beyond that date. Specifically looking at 5 conditions, whether there's a clear delivery plan in place, whether there's a direct link on jobs and houses, whether funding sources are fully confirmed, whether the Strategic Board supports the position of the project, and that contractual commitments be in place by the 30th of September 2021. So there are now 18 projects that are going beyond this date. They are set out in the report. In that report, we've also made clear the expected completion dates for these projects. Any projects that are going experiencing delays of greater than 6 months relative to that completion date do need to come back to the board for a further decision to agree that extension. So that's important parameter for the board to be aware of, because that's how we're kind of tracking these projects going forward, is around those stated completion dates for the projects. There are 9 projects that are identified as high risk, and they're considered either in the pack today, or there are some decisions that are coming to the March meeting that's taking place this time, 12th March next month. In particular, for these high risk projects, we're really asking the question of whether the funding should remain allocated to the projects, whether there's confidence around that delivery, and the board is comfortable in transferring that funding before the end of financial year, or if it's got to a point where actually there's not the confidence around the delivery, there's not the kind of firm delivery schedule for the project, and whether that funding should be reallocated to other projects on the pipeline. The final point I was going to make on this report, there's 2 specific projects that are mentioned in this report. The Bexhill Enterprise Park North is a decision that is due to come forward in March. The board be aware last September that the planning had been refused for the project, but an appeal was being heard. That appeal has been heard. We're just waiting for the outcome of that, and we're expecting an update to come to the March Accountability Board meeting. In holding off till the end of March, there is a risk if that planning appeal is not successful, we wouldn't be able to reallocate the funding in time to meet the deadline and be able to transfer that funding by the end of the financial year. So there is a risk there, and that's why we're asking the board to agree they remain comfortable in holding the funding against that project. Final point is around Basildon Innovation Warehouse. This is a project that's previously approved by the board last year. It is around commercial space, and it's identified that that's no longer viable to progress with that project at this time. So that project, we're asking the board to agree that's removed from the programme, and that will then release funding to support Edge Hub as the next project down on the LGF pipeline. So we're asking the board to agree that decision as well. I think that's enough for me on that report, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Questions, comments? Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question as an expression of disappointment that the Basildon Borough Council couldn't see ways in which they could move this project forward, and therefore have said it's not achievable. And I agree that the money should be reused elsewhere, but I am disappointed for the residents of Basildon, because whilst it's a very strong economy down there, it nevertheless still needs to invest and develop much more innovative type of services. And indeed, this would have provided them with the opportunity to have developed some of that innovation and creative thinking. So I'm just disappointed in the fact that it hasn't been able to be realised as well. So thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Goff.
Thank you, and apologies if this was covered, because for a moment in the latter part of what you were saying, Rhiannon, my screen sort of froze, so I couldn't hear what was said. In terms of the reallocation of funding proposed from Basildon, as I understand it, the next scheme on the list is the Edge Hub, and I just wanted to clarify what the picture was on that. I've got a more general question, but just wanted to clarify the picture. And if you've already stated that, as I say, apologies, I was kicked out for a moment.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, so we've got 870,000 that was due to be spent on the Basildon Innovation Centre. That will now come back into the pot and can be reallocated to the Edge Hub. I think the Edge Hub was seeking £1.22 million, or roughly around that figure. So we just want that confirmation that they are happy to proceed with that slightly reduced figure relative to what they asked for. It also depends on other decisions during the report today. So if there was further funding that came back into the pot, obviously that could then enable the full funding to be supported for that project. But yes, our intention is to bring back the Edge Hub to the next meeting in March and to consider the award of funding to that project.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goff, did you say you had another question as well?
It was, yeah, I wasn't sure whether this was the point to raise it, but it's related to, and I think Rhiannon, again, you touched on this, it's what exactly happens vis-a-vis funding decisions not taken today, but taken at the March meeting, because I think there is this question over whether they can still be reallocated within LGF or whether it requires another mechanism. And most of, I think, what we have in the papers suggests that that's not the case, i.e. it couldn't be reallocated within LGF. But I'm not 100% clear on that. I just wanted to understand both the constraints, the rationale as to is it the case that it can't be done within LGF, or does it then get allocated across to Growing Places Fund or whatever? So it was really just to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, so we do have a pipeline of projects in place. It's not an extremely long pipeline is a concern. So if we suddenly had funding back from all 9 of those high risk projects, there would be more funding than there is the length of the pipeline. But generally, if we had funding back over the next few meetings, we'd intend to support those projects that are identified on the pipeline.
On the LGF pipeline, if I may.
Pardon, sorry?
On the LGF.
On the LGF pipeline, yes, that's correct. Yeah, there is a logistical timing issue in terms of us making sure we've got the legal agreements all signed in place before we transfer that funding. And when we're looking at the 12th of March meeting, that then becomes exceptionally tight to be able to make sure we've got the legal agreements in place and to be able to transfer that funding. That's even more tight when we consider we might need to recover funding from the local authorities before we can then move it across to another local authority. So there is a concern, any projects, any decisions that are delayed till March, that is then extremely tight and does put a risk whether we can transfer that funding in time. I suppose our backup option has always been that we would move funding to the Growing Places Fund pot, and we could bring that forward as a decision in March. I think from an accountable body view, I think with local growth funds, if we're transferring that across to partner authorities, government can see that the funding has left SELEP accounts. Whereas if we're just moving it between the LGF pot and the Growing Places Fund pot, that's a way of showing that it's allocated to certain projects, but there's no kind of physical transfer of funding. So that's why we're more leaning towards looking at the pipeline and making sure we can support those projects that the board has prioritised there before we look at the Growing Places Fund as our plan B.
Good.
Stan, did you want to add to that?
So I was just going to come in and say, so if there's been an allocation to the project, but we're not able to physically get the money out, the money wouldn't then go to GPF instead. The allocation to the LGF would remain, and that money would go even if it had to happen in the next financial year. So where we've got the allocations and the pipeline in place, that would always take precedence over any swap to GPF should that happen. So there's not a chance really of projects in the pipeline losing out because of a timing issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Councillor Simmons, Councillor Finch, Councillor Woodley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Rhiannon made reference to the Bexhill Enterprise North project, and it's coming before a planning inquiry on the 19th of January. We are optimistic. I should first of all declare an interest as the Director of Sea Change Sussex, but we are optimistic of a positive outcome, not least because the planning authority in question have purchased developments on the same site. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Finch.
Chair, just to give you comfort in advance of the next meeting in March, that actually under, I think it's 4.4, the prioritisation M11 Junction 8, I can tell you now that the funding has been put in place. That would just be, if I dare say it, tick the box next time.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. Councillor Woodley.
Thank you, Chair. Just to re-emphasise the fact that time is running out, and I know Rhiannon said that, and we have to be really honest with ourselves, and hopefully we are, as a group, honest to the fact that we don't want to lose this money. We want to make sure that our residents, wherever they are, get the full benefit of the funding that's allocated to this LEP, and hopefully we'll be very mindful of that fact going forward. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I couldn't agree more. Chris.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Just really building on from Ron's point, is that clearly, as far as LGF money is concerned, if it is not spent by the 31st of March and isn't allocated to GPF, then clearly it has to leave the SELEP accounts and has to go effectively to the accountable body. So to that extent, SELEP has then lost control of it, and we need to be certain that in making that transfer across to the accountable body, that we are acting within our powers and flexibilities. So I think this board should be seeking assurance from the Section 151 officer that everything is in order, that we are doing the right thing in terms of transferring that money across. But also, we need to make sure, this board, and I think that the strategic board also ought to make sure that they're confident that the relevant legal agreements that have been referred to are also in place to make sure that money will be spent once it's left SELEP's accounts. And finally, just building on precisely what Ron was saying, is that this board and the strategic board need to be assured that these projects will come forward, will be capable of being completed, And therefore, we do, from a reputation point of view, for the Accountability Board's reputation and for the Strategic Board's reputation, we need to, well, you need to be sure as the Accountability Board and the Strategic Board need to be assured that when people are making statements about deliverability of projects, that those are been carefully made, and that we can be confident in any statements about deliverability. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Stephanie, did you want to come in here and say something about that? And then I've got Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to offer a point of clarification, really, just to assure that, of course, all of SELEP's funds that are not allocated out to the projects sit with ECC as your accountable body already. The issue at the year end is ensuring that SELEP, whether it's ECC acting as the accountable body or not, SELEP issues the funding to the relevant projects, and that's via the upper tier authorities. So by year end, it's transferring the money to the respective upper tier authority, and that's the part that we will need to ensure has happened. But just to rest assured, the government has not stated that we have to spend the money by the year end. Their issue is that the projects have to be delivered. So for SELEP's accountability and assurance, it's ensuring that the projects are delivered.
Thank you for that clarification. Simon.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I've got two questions, I think, really. First around accountability, and then I guess around the money. So, and I'm conscious we might be dipping into agenda item 15 here already. So if we were to transfer the money, I guess, does that also then mean that our accountability as an accountability board for the successful delivery of those projects then stop? And if it doesn't, I guess that's reassurance. So good, we're shaking heads. We're shaking heads, so that's good. They don't just disappear into the ether. I guess the second thing is if that money is transferred and we make that decision, which I think is a sensible decision anyway, does provide more local decision. What's the consequence then to SELEP in terms of its reputation with government? Because I think there's been a lot of talk, we've just mentioned it now, about our confidence in the spend. I don't think there's any lack of will to want to make sure that we have good projects that can deliver. But at the last meeting, I asked for us to put, or I suggested that we put something together that helps us learn by those projects that have failed and have left big gaps in money. I haven't seen that yet. I would still like to see that. We've got to show some evidence that we've at least looked back and realised that whilst we had the best intent, actually what did we learn from those projects? Because they all, in individual cases, have really valid reasons as to why they can't be delivered. So I think we need to maybe push that forward quicker so that we've at least got something to show that we've reflected on it and taken away our own group and personal views on that to see what and why those projects haven't met those timescales.
Thank you, Simon. Rhiannon, did you want to come back? And then I've got Councillor Finch.
Yeah, if I just briefly respond to that around the reputational risk, I do think government will be asking, how much are we actually spent on local growth fund projects? And as a board and as a LEP, we need to make sure we've got really clear rationale for why we're supporting those projects that are going beyond that timescale. So that's why we've made sure that this board and the strategic board also agreeing that any substantial delays to projects and substantial changes to the spend profiles. So we've got really clear rationale, and that's why we're considering each project in turn today to make sure board members are fully comfortable with the position, particularly on the future delivery. That there are firm timescales and plans in place for the delivery of these projects going beyond that timescale. We all sort of nod our heads on the transfer of funding. That doesn't reduce the accountability of this board. There are still assurances through legal agreements that the projects must be delivered. If they're not being delivered, then there's a risk around that funding being reclawed by SELEP or the accountable body on the SELEP's behalf. So we do still have those assurances and mechanisms to ensure the delivery of the projects going forward, even though the funding will have been transferred by that point. On the lessons learned piece, yeah, we fully recognise the need to do that. I was going to leave it to Sarah to break the news, but I think we're looking at potentially removing the May accountability board from the agenda, and that then frees up time to really look at that lessons learned exercise and be able to report that back to the board at the following meeting in July. There's been quite a lot of work going on in the background to make sure we get the funding out the door. That's been seen as our priority over these last few months. But once the exercise is complete and we've got the funding out at the end of this financial year, absolutely, that's the time then to look at those lessons learned.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah. I was just going to come in after that, say, yeah, it is the very next thing on our list. Once we've got through this year-end period, the resources spread incredibly thin, and it is at the moment to get to this end point. But then that is exactly the next thing that we need to start doing.
It is true to say, though, if I'm right, I am going to bring you in, Councillor Finch, I promise, in a minute. It is true to say, though. Oh, sorry, someone's echoing. I think it might be you, Howard. Thank you. Turn your mic off. Thanks. I think it's true to say, though, am I right, Suzanne, in saying that as things have developed, you are changing the way that the service level agreements have been developed from some of the lessons already that you've learned? Is that true?
Absolutely. It's been an ongoing and continuous process to be tweaking how we're managing the programme and how we're managing the legal agreements and the documentation, and there has been many changes that have been implemented just as part of as business as usual, but we do really want to do that sort of programme end review and proper look back and assessment of how we could do things better, and also looking at how the funding and the investment has played out across the area, that plays into the diversity plan that we're looking at too. So that there is a large piece of work there that we really want to do and really want to bring back to this board and to strategic board. And so I just want to sort of let board know, hopefully they'll be assured that we are working on that as a matter of priority once we've got through this slightly sticky year-end period.
Thank you. Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier on, I just wanted to build on Simon Cook's point, but I thought on page 21, table 1 gave you a macro picture of the situation and the spend, and therefore the comment about deep dives into variations. Maybe we should take some of those examples where there is a variation and just explore those as the reason. There may be very valid reasons for those variations, yeah. But that does give you an indication, doesn't it, that table of where the forecast or the planned spend, and therefore where there is slippage, it tells you those that are and aren't spending the money in accordance with their plans. I'll say no more than that, and be quietly confident looking at the Essex numbers that we're okay anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. Good points, and I'm sure that the team will look at that and use that information. Okay, I'm conscious of time, and we've got a huge amount to get through, but it was a really good and important discussion to have. So thank you. So do we agree that the updated total planned LGF spend in 2021 of 50.189 million, excluding the DFT, retained schemes, and increasing to 73.183, including the DFT retained schemes as set out in Table 1 and Appendix A? Do we agree that?
Agree.
Agreed.
I see your hands. Thank you. Agree the spend of LGF beyond 30th of September 2021 and the revised completion date for the 18 projects listed in Appendix C. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Do we agree that the Bexhill Enterprise Park North project should remain on hold and no LGF will be transferred over and above the 0.440 million LGF currently held by East Sussex County Council until the outcome of the planning appeal is considered by the Accountability Board on the 12th of March 2021?
Sorry, Sarah. Sorry, can we just interrupt very quickly? Just to highlight, given Councillor Simmons' declaration on sea change, we think he's not able to vote on this item. Sorry, we should have alerted you before.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, sorry, Councillor Simmons, you are unable to vote, but can I see whether the rest of you agree with that statement?
Agree.
Thank you very much. Do we agree the cancellation of the Basildon Innovation Warehouse project from the LGF programme?
Regrettably, yes.
Agree.
Thank you. And note the 870,000 LGF allocation from the cancellation of the Basildon Innovation Warehouse project is reallocated to the next project on the LGF programme.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Great. Okay, let's move now swiftly on to item. Councillor Woodley, were you trying to say something?
Just to say also, agree that, but should we state what that project was as well?
But it's the edge.
Yeah, I know, but should we not
does it need to
state
state
it?
that? Does it not need to state that? Rhiannon, point of order.
Yeah, we could add that to note that it's going to that project. Yeah, that's fine.
So is everybody happy with that addition to that?
Very happy. Thank
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed? Thank you. Okay, thanks. Let's move swiftly on to item 6, which is the A127 Fair Glen interchange. And this is to consider the award of the funding. Howard, I'm going to hand over to you for this.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for my feedback interruption a little bit earlier. So yes, this report is for the Accountability Board to consider the award of £13,500,000 of a DFT retained local growth fund towards the A127, A130 Fair Glen interchange, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with a high certainty of this being achieved. The business case is subject to the approval of the Secretary of State. The board previously approved in June 2019 the release of 1.5 million of the total 15 million for this project in order to help fund the development of the full business case. The project has been prioritised as a location which can be upgraded to improve movement through the A127, A130 corridors, and the benefits of the project will be felt across 5 local authorities in South Essex and will play an important role in supporting housing and job growth in the area and the south of the county as a whole. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments on this project? Councillor Finch.
I think the only thing to say is that this is very welcome in the south of the county, and indeed, as Howard has indicated, it has a very strong performance benefit to the whole county, but particularly in the south of the county as well. So it's to be welcomed.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley, and then Councillor Gledhill, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I totally agree with Councillor Finch's comments. It's a definite must, and fully support his approach on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, to echo what Ron said there as well, to back what David said, and I know if the leader of Castle Point was here, he would be saying, yeah, this is absolutely great, and if you want to spare some more money for the Fair Glen interchange, then feel free to do so. But yes, it will be welcome, certainly. I don't speak on behalf of him, but certainly having had this conversation with him many, many times, I can assure you this will be most welcome there too.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to say that East Sussex is supportive of the recommendation being made here.
Great. So I think that means that we could move swiftly to whether we approve the award of 13,500,000 of DFT retained LGF to the project, which has been assessed by the independent technical evaluator as offering high value for money with a high certainty of being achieved. This approval is subject to the final approval of the project by the Secretary of State for Transport. Do we approve that? Can I see your hands?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move now on to item 7, which is the Colchester Grow On space. Howard, you're up on this one again. Except you're on mute.
Apologies, thank you for that. Thank you. This report is for the Accountability Board to consider the award of £3,777,451 of local growth fund towards the Colchester Grow On Space project, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with a medium certainty of achieving this. The project in Colchester seeks to convert the dilapidated town centre former bus depot into a high quality grow on space adjacent to an already successful creative business incubator. The development is still being considered by Colchester Borough Council's planning officers, with a decision to be presented to the planning committee there on the 4th of March. This is why the independent technical evaluator has suggested that the rating is a medium certainty rather than high certainty. The key benefits of this project are 698 square metres of new commercial space, predominantly high quality grant space, the creation of 10 new businesses and 86 new jobs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Finch.
Chair, thank you. I think it's important to recognise that right next door on the very same site, there has been approved by Colchester Borough Council planning application for an alumni student accommodation block, which was approved by Colchester Borough Council. It would be perverse even if they were not to approve this particular development, because it would suit perhaps many of the students that are going into that accommodation block as and when it's built.
Thank you. Any other comments or queries? No, thank you. So do we approve the award of £3,770,451 LGF to support the delivery of the project identified in the business case and which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with medium certainty of achieving this, subject to planning permission having been confirmed by Colchester Borough Council Planning Committee on the 4th of March 2021 and approval of spend beyond the growth deal by SELEP Limited on the 19th of March 2021. Do we approve?
Agreed.
Thank you. Do we agree that if full planning consents aren't awarded at the meeting of the Colchester Borough Council Planning Committee on the 4th of March 2021, that the funding will revert to the LGF pipeline? Do we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. And note that under agenda item 15, the board will be asked to agree that the 3.77 million LGF is transferred to Essex County Council as lead authority by the 31st of March 2021. No funding can be drawn down by Essex County Council until the conditions set out above have been satisfied.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Thanks. Let's move on now swiftly to item 8, which is the LGF COVID-19 fund report. This is about considering the award of funding to 7 LGF projects. Kate, I'm going to hand over to you on this. Thank you. Or I hoped I was going to hand over to you. Rhiannon, are you able to step in?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah.
Thank you.
So at the strategic board meeting in December last year, the board agreed a new pipeline of projects. 8 of those funding decisions are coming forward today, 7 of which are considered within this specific report. The projects are all projects that are currently already on the LGF programme. They've already been supported by the board previously, but this is seeking additional funding due to the impact of COVID, where there might be cost increases or local contributions have fallen away from the projects. So these have already gone through a business case process. The ITE has looked at a change request for these projects to consider whether they still present value for money, considering the increase in public sector funding which will be going into these projects. Many of them are already underway, these projects, so there's no kind of delivery concerns that have been flagged for these projects, no high risk delivery concerns for these projects. So they're recommended here for approval. I'll hand over to Steve briefly just to talk about the assessment of these projects. Once he's off mute.
Thank you, Stephen. Are you with us? Yes, go ahead. No, we can't hear you there. All right. I think we're going to have a challenge to do that, but I do hope that you've had a chance to read Steer's report in your papers. As Rhiannon said, they are considered high value for money with high certainty of delivery.
Can we hear you now, Steve? No. Okay, so Steer's assessments, what they've done is rather than completely update the business case, what we've got as supplementary information around this case for additional funding. So Steer have considered this to ensure that with the additional funding ask, it still presents high value for money with a BCR of over 2 to 1. So all of these projects continue to have a BCR value of over 2 to 1 despite the cost increases, and therefore they're recommended to the board for approval with that in mind.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you, Rhiannon. Okay, so do we have any questions or comments at all? No. Okay, so do we agree the award of the additional £3,802,000 to the following 7 projects which have been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty? And those are the Kent and Medway Medical School, Flight Path Phase 2 Essex, Dover Tap as part of the Kent Strategic Congestion Management Programme, the A127 Essential Maintenance stroke the Bell Southend, East Malling Niab Kent, Southend Town Centre, and Skills and Business Support for Rural Businesses Post-Brexit project. Do we agree with that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully we'll be able to sort some of these technical problems out in a minute. Thank you. Councillor Woodley, did you have a question?
On the original, we had the £1.5 million for the A13 widening. Have I missed that somehow?
So the A13 one, there's 2 projects that were agreed on the pipeline where the value for money was tighter to a threshold. So for those projects, we've asked for a revised business case to come forward. So for the A13 project, additional information around the value for money has been submitted. That's currently been reviewed by Steer, and that's going to come to the March meeting for a funding decision there. So we're expecting a full update on M11 Junction 8 and A13 widening at the next meeting.
Okay, but you all know that I'm very scared of Anna, so just make sure that goes through, yeah?
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Maybe
I shouldn't say that on public, but yeah.
You're right, Ray. Ron, you're right.
We will be considering it at the March meeting, so thank you very much for that. Okay, let's now move on to item 9, which is Eastbourne Fisherman's Quay update, and it's Helen I'm handing over to on this one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So this report sets out a proposed change in project scope alongside a request for additional LGF funding, which has been considered by the Strategic Board through the LGF COVID-19 Response Fund. So this board previously considered the project in December 2017 when £1.15 million of Growing Places Fund funding was awarded to support delivery of phase 1 of the project. And again in July 2020 when a further £1.08 million Local Growth Fund funding was awarded to support delivery of phases 2 and 3. Phase 1 of the project is progressing well, with completion expected in spring 2021. So this report considers phases 2 and 3 only. So as I'm sure you're aware, the UK fishing industry has been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as the pandemic has resulted in the collapse of both the domestic and export markets. The majority of the catch from the Eastbourne fishing fleet is exported to the EU, South Korea and China. Therefore, this project is seeking to reduce the fleet's reliance on the export market through relocalising the seafood supply chain, which will help the fishing industry become more resilient and less vulnerable to any future global shocks. Obviously, the issues faced by the fishing fleet have been further compounded by the protracted EU exit negotiations and the uncertainty that this caused for the fleet. Whilst the deal was ultimately reached, it did fail to deliver on 2 of the priority areas for negotiation, and therefore the fleet don't think they're going to receive the improved economic opportunities that they hoped for as a result of the deal. So the project seeks to secure the future of the fishing fleet through supporting the establishment of a new operating model with a more local focus and through provision of the facilities needed to support the diversification of their activities. So it was originally intended in the project scope received by the board last year that there would be separate buildings for phases 2 and phase 3 of the project. Phase 2 seeks to offer fishing equipment storage and workshop space, while phase 3 will provide a visitor centre and space for diversification of activities. Under the revised project scope set out in this report, phases 2 and 3 will be brought together into one building so as to reduce construction costs in light of increases seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The change of scope ensures that the same facilities as originally envisaged are delivered, however they will be delivered to a reduced scale. Despite the change in scope, the project continues to offer significant productivity and resilience benefits to the fishing fleet. In addition, the project will continue to play a key role in establishing a link with the local community through improving site safety, allowing public access to the quay for the first time. Whilst the visitor centre will be smaller in scale, it will still have the capacity to host community and school visits and training courses. It's anticipated that full delivery of the project will be complete by the end of March 2022. This is subject to securing the required variation to the planning permission for the site. However, as detailed in the report, this is considered to be low risk. The proposed change in project scope has been brought forward to minimise the overall increase in cost and the level of additional LGF funding requested, while safeguarding the majority of the project benefits. If the board approve the change in project scope and the award of additional LGF funding, delivery of phases 2 and 3 will now be fully funded through the Local Growth Fund, as due to the reasons set out in the report, the Eastbourne under 10 metre community interest company are no longer in a position to provide the match funding committed in the original project business case. Without the LGF investment, it is unlikely that phases 2 and 3 of the project will be delivered for a number of years, by which point it is expected that the majority of the fishing fleet will have left Eastbourne. So I'm now going to try and pass over to Steve, who will run through the outcome of Steer's assessment of the project.
Thank you, Helen. So take 2. Can people hear me?
Yes, great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you and good morning. Just to confirm from the previous item, yes, it was our assessment that all the schemes made a strong case for additional funding and continue to present a high value for money with robust and reasonable business cases. But with regards to Eastbourne fishermen, as Helen's mentioned, additional funding has been sought, but with no commensurate increase in benefits. This has reduced the benefit cost ratio calculated to 1.5 to 1, which is a medium category, which is below the high threshold set out in the South East SELEP's assurance framework. However, given the scale of LGF ask, the scheme is still eligible for exemption number 1, on page 51 of 67 of the LEP's assurance framework. This is for schemes that show an overwhelming strategic case, that have a benefit cost ratio of 1.5 to 1 or higher, but for which the effort that would be required to calculate all benefits would be disproportionate to the value of the scheme. It is our view that if all benefits were calculated, not just the additional job outcomes, but the protection of heritage assets, the health and safety improvements, the wider improvements to the visitor economy, this scheme would present high value for money, above 2 to 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any questions, comments? Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have long championed this project right from the point of its origins, and the pragmatic variations that we are seeking to deal with this morning are wholly sensible in producing the outcomes that we were first seeking. So I would encourage my colleagues that this has real value in the furtherment of the fishing team on the South Coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Any other comments or questions, or shall we move to vote? Okay, so do we agree that the proposed change of project scope as set out in section 5 of this report can be implemented? Yep, agreed. Okay, and do we agree the award of the additional £360,000 LGF funding to support the delivery of the project, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with low medium certainty of achieving this? Agreed. Okay, and note that subject to agreement in relation to 2.1.1 and 2.1.2 that a full funding package is in place to deliver the project, and notes that under item agenda 15 the board will be asked to agree that the full 1.44 million LGF fund allocation should be transferred to East Sussex County Council by the 31st of March 2021. Okay, let's move on now to item 10, which is the A28 Surrey Link Road. Before I hand over to Rhiannon, I do want to note that we have, as a board, received additional information in relation to the planning, which has been circulated to you all, I believe. And it was just for information. There was no public question was asked. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. So the board, I'm sure you're all familiar with this project now. There are 3 concerns raised at the last board meeting, particularly around the planning of for the residential developments that are due to financially contribute to the delivery of the project. Good news that last week Canterbury City Council supported the applications for the private sector developments. They were both supported last week, so that does tick off one of the conditions that were set against this project by the board. The next stage is, so this board has agreed that by March, Kent County Council need to approve the planning for the actual project itself, and I believe that's on track to be considered in advance of the next accountability board meeting, so that the board can receive an update in March. The other part of assurance that we're looking for in this project is around the funding package for the scheme. So with the proposal as set out in the report is that Kent County Council will forward fund those development contributions in advance of them actually coming forward with the phase of residential development on the site. So we're looking again for the Section 151 officer written confirmation that they remain comfortable with that funding model as set out within the report. And again, for that to come back to the board in March. In terms of the actual recommendations here, so there are 3 recommendations set out in this report. One of those was if the planning was successful for the residential development, that would be option 1. Option 2, I think we can now discount as the planning's been met. Option 3 was flagging there's quite a lot of work to be done to make sure that we've got confidence around the deliverability, particularly of that funding package, and looking for that confirmation. So as I think we spoke about under the very first item of this board meeting, there is a risk that if we hold off on this decision until our next board meeting, there'll not be very much time at all to make sure we can spend that funding within this financial year. So there is a third option set out in this report, which would be that the board chooses to reallocate that funding now to enable us to make sure we can reallocate it to an alternative project and transfer it by the end of this financial year. I think that was all I was going to say, but happy to take any comments.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Councillor Goff.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rhiannon, for that. Yeah, as reported, we've seen clearly this was the point we were discussing at our last meeting, which was what would happen with the planning process, and we've now seen from the point of view of the linked housing developments that from Canterbury planning, there has been approval subject to all subsequent processes being completed, but that has happened. It is due to come to the Kent County the road project itself is due to come to the Kent County Council Planning Committee on the 9th of March. And equally, Kent County Council has set out its position, though there's not at this moment the formal note, but it is within the report about the funding package and the timing on that. This remains, I think, an important project, partly because of the scale of the housing development with which it's associated, which is 1,000 homes. It's the Surrey crossing, which is what this is ultimately to relieve, is particularly on a bad day, a tremendous bottleneck. I think I suspect some others on this call have probably experienced this at some point or other. And equally, were we to see the whole thing go ahead still without SELEP's contribution, then I think you'd have a combination of the kind of development that I think gives development a bad name. So you would see, for example, affordable housing, and this was, I think, raised in one of the letters or emails sent to the group, so sent to the board. So just to clarify the position on that, there was no affordable housing linked to the Surrey development specifically, but the Broadoak development linked does have some 20, I think it's 26%, if I remember rightly, affordable housing. Clearly that, and indeed areas such as education contributions, would end up being a casualty of the fact that you would end up with the developers meeting the costs of the road. So I think it would end up with an impact that would be certainly very undesirable from the point of view of the county council as an infrastructure authority, but I think also very undesirable in terms of its wider impact. So for those reasons, I would urge that we go with option 1. And clearly there will be further reports to come to our March meeting following the Kent County Council Planning Committee, and the need also to provide that financial assurance as well.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think following the revelation about the approval of planning, Canterbury City Council, East Sussex is very supportive of option 1 on this project.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? So essentially we have 2 options now really in front of us, option 1 and option 3, if I understand it. So it's basically, you know, we're going to go through for it, or we're going to pull the money back in. The 2, as I see it in simplistic terms, the 2 options in front of us. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, I'm going to ask us to consider option 1. And obviously if we vote for that, I won't look at option 3. So option 1 is, if planning for the so we know that the planning for the Canterbury City Council has been approved by, the planning has been approved by Canterbury City Council, so that we are noting that the planning consent has been secured for the Broadoak and Sturry developments. Note that the requirement for the planning consent can be secured from Kent County Council for the project itself by the 12th of March 2021. If planning consent is not secured by this date, the remaining 4.791 million LGF will be automatically reallocated away from the project. And note that the requirement for Kent County Council to provide written confirmation that the full funding package is in place by the 12th of March 2021 to enable the remaining 4.791 million LGF to be transferred by the end of 2020-21, as set out in section 8.3, subject to board agreement under item agenda 15. If written confirmation is not provided by this date, the remaining 4.791 million LGF will be automatically reallocated away from the project. So, are you in favour of that option?
Option 1.
Option 1. Okay, that looks like we are unanimous on that, so we don't need to go to option 3. Thank you very much. That's right. I'm following due process, aren't I, on this one? Just checking.
Yeah,
thank you. Fine. Okay, right. Item 11, which is the Maidstone Integrated Transport Package. I'm handing over to you, Rhiannon, again.
Yeah, so this package of improvements, it was awarded £8.9 million across 3 specific interventions. These interventions, all of which the delivery is going beyond the growth deal period. So it's really asking for the board to confirm its support for the project and reaffirm the delivery timescales for these interventions. So the Willington Street project, this one is, there's subject to planning on this, is for an aspect of it to sort of make changes to the wall that's the boundary with Moat Park, and that is coming forward. The planning is due to be submitted this month with a decision expected in March-April time. Subject to that was been approved. The construction will actually start in 2022-2023 for this project, and that's particularly because of its location along the A20 corridor, which is part of the resilience package for the impact of Brexit on the M20 corridor. Sorry, so it's on the A2 corridor, and that resilience there needs to be maintained in case of the impact on the M20. I hope you've just followed that. So the actual delivery of it will be in a few years' time, but we're hoping to have the approvals in place to make sure we've got that commitment and the planning is in place for the project this year, hopefully, or into April next year. The second project, the Loose Road Corridor, this is again one that's going to go beyond the growth deal period. The planning again for this one is due to be submitted this month with a decision within sort of again April-May time. This one is due to start on site in summer 2021, so an earlier expected start date on this one. But again, planning is needed for an aspect of it, for a demolition of a particular building on that corridor. Final one, Cold Harbour Roundabout. This is the most advanced of the projects, and this one is due to commence in May this year, with completion in November 2022. So this is the more advanced of the projects. Really, given the fact that these projects are going beyond the Grovedale period, we're just looking for the board to, as I say, reaffirm support for the projects, confirm the expected completion dates, but also agree that actually we want to see the planning in place for those specific interventions by September 2021 to make sure we're seeing that progress and there's no real issues with the consents for the delivery of the projects. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Councillor Gough.
Thank you. I mean, more just a comment than a question. I think Rhiannon's summed it up very well. These are important strategic projects for the county town and for the network around it. It's actually been one that's had a lot of engagement. Some of the designs, particularly around, or some of the elements of the project, particularly around Wellington Street, were changed as a result of that. So it's been quite a sort of inclusive approach. And I think the key element also is that the final element of unspent funding be released to KCC, subject to the planning being agreed, I think, on phases 1 and 3. So I think it all looks very reasonable. And these are projects which have been developed quite well in terms of the smoothness of delivery, the negotiations with the Secretary of State, etc., etc.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. Any other questions or comments at all? Councillor Woodley.
Thank you. It's not that I'm disagreeing that the funding and everything else and the projects are vital, but we're moving further and further away from March of this year. It's now looking at some of these things and planning to take place in about September. Are we confident? That's what I was going to really say. That the government said this should be spent by March the 31st. We're looking at a 6-month extension as a board that we've agreed. It just seems that we're now going to be going well past September. I'd go with the board's decision, but I just wanted to raise again the point that we keep stretching out decisions that are fundamental to the funding we get from government. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Rhiannon and Councillor Gough, I didn't know whether you were able to give any assurances on the kind of timescale, but Rhiannon, also there's a question actually about spend as well. So do you want to answer the question about what is seen by government as spend? And then also, Councillor Gough, I didn't know whether you would be able to comment at all about the timescale. Thanks.
Yeah, so on this project, I mean, there has been some spend incurred on the development stages of the project, but as you expect, the main construction cost will be where the majority of the LGF is spent, really. Yes, there will be a fair amount of funding spent beyond the Grovedale period. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what the figure is. I think it's over about at least 4 million that will be spent beyond that timescale. So yes, this is one of the project that does add up to that total £74 million that's going beyond the Grovedale period, and why we're really looking for that confidence around the delivery of the projects. So in this report, we do set out the expected completion dates for the projects, and we'll be looking for those assurances that they can be met and continue to provide updates to the board on the progress on that.
Thank you, Councillor Gough.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And picking up Ron's point, I mean, I do take the point, though I think it's true of a number of the things that we're considering, and this one I think probably has rather clearer timelines and lower risk than some others that we might consider. So the timelines are clear. Quite a lot of progress has been made in the way I described. On the planning side, clearly planning is still pending, but there have been, as I understand it, extensive discussions in advance, and those are looking pretty promising. So whilst you can never absolutely preempt a planning decision, it looks favourable. And as I say, so far, we have already seen a lot of progress on these projects, and the timelines going forward are clear. So I don't think it counts as, in any sense, a high-risk project, and it is one of a number which we do regrettably perhaps have to have that spending beyond our set deadline. But I think it's actually got a fairly clear timeline on it.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you to Roger, and I'm sure it's correct in what we're doing. Can I ask a general question around everything? Is that we hope that money from government will continue to the LEPs across the country for essential developments and funding for residents, etc. If some of these projects can be first on the list, and so we can release some of the current money into, not particularly this one, but release some of the current funding that's allocated that's way past the timescales to projects that can come forward and work on. And then the ones that are on our project list, we know they're wanted, we know they're desperately in terms of required the funding. Could they not be on our first next stage of funding coming through in maybe next year? And therefore that money then could be spent now and then still be spent on the projects that will be going through in a later stage. But as I said, I'm happy to go with what Councillor Goff said and Roger said. I understand his situation. I just feel we have to be very mindful of the fact of the delays and the money being spent. The government will pick up what's happening, and it's, of course, it's the LEP's reputation. But if we can sort of say, look, the next lot of tranche of funding we get can be allocated to projects that are slipping, and we can spend the money that we currently got. Right, I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Suzanne, you've got your hands up.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute them for a second. Obviously, that is an entirely legitimate course of action for board should they want to take it. I would just like to flag that we've had no indication of any further funding in 21-22. So I'd just like board to be aware of that risk if that's the course of action they choose.
Councillor Finch.
I think, Chair, I think Ron raises perhaps an interesting point, but I think it's one that's worthy of more careful consideration and discussion, respecting the fact Ron's just introduced the conversation here. I am fully supportive of the project that we're discussing at the moment and the funding. And I think we do have to recognise that we can plan projects perfectly, but then things like COVID come along and other problems arise. Unintended consequences might be we discover in terms of road structures, we find that we suddenly found something beneath the surface that we never imagined. That shouldn't stop us going ahead with those projects if we think they're of value to us, and they wouldn't be here if we didn't think they were of value to us. And therefore we have to accept that in the case of delays, that we should just stand fast and keep the funding in there for those projects until the sponsor turns around and says, you know what, I can't deliver this. And the example you've got is of the Innovation Centre in Basildon, where that one has come forward because it can't be delivered by the Borough Council, as an example only. So I think 2 points. One is Ron's made a discussion point, which I think we need to consider carefully. And secondly, projects with the best will and intention may well slip it doesn't stop our resolve in terms of delivering those projects, because we fundamentally believe that they're right and deliver what we need them to deliver, both for the residents and indeed for economic growth and the well-being of our own areas as well. I'll shut up, Chairman. Chair, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Finch. Good points well made. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Following the assurances given by Roger Goff, I would be very happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you. So there are sort of there's two things in front of us at the moment. One is the kind of the detail of this specific project. The other is a much more general conversation in some ways about the way we prioritize the spend, to kind of sum it up very simplistically, and the way we can get projects delivered within the timescale. So I mean, I would be interested to hear other board members' views on this. If anyone would like to come forward and say anything. Councillor Finch.
I thought I'd already commented on Ron's point, and I wasn't being dismissive of Ron's point. Excuse me. I just thought if it's an important point that we wish to discuss, it needs proper airtime on an agenda for that discussion, so that we can prepare what the proposition really is, and then each of us how we want to respond to that. I mean, I have responded, as it were, impromptu, excuse me, but I equally well, sitting down for a half an hour, I might think up many different angles that I wish to consider in respect of that proposition. So that would be my point.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm having real internet issues, so I'm dipping in and out of some of the wording at the moment. But I mean, I think I will come on to, I've got Simon, and then I think Councillor Goff, and then Councillor Woodley. I mean, what we might want to do, and Councillor Chambers, but what we might want to do is consider taking this to the strategic board as an overarching discussion first, rather than discussing it in detail at the accountability board. Simon.
I agree.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I may be confusing what Ron and David have said, but following up on David's suggestion, we do need some time, and I think that's what you said at the beginning around the May accountability board. Ron's point around the process, and I think Suzanne and Rhiannon said about the process. This is about the qualitative judgments we're also making around these bids, isn't it? And giving us a mechanism to feel comfortable to say no to something, even though we want as much money coming to Kent and Medway as possible. So I think you indicated at the beginning that we would have some time to properly discuss this outside of, because we're going way off piste from the actual item of the Maidstone work that's so needed. So I think we do need that time dedicated to really talk about that and learn from some of the experiences historically.
Thank you, Simon. I think it was then Councillor Goff, did you, and then Councillor Woodley, and then Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. I'll be very brief because I think Simon and David have both set out views which I very much agree with. There will be a time to look at those issues, as you say, partly as a review of all our experiences. Let's do that then. And meanwhile, we have quite a busy agenda today at the moment.
Absolutely, thank you. Councillor Woodley and then Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to say, look, I am supportive of this. Don't get me wrong, I'm supportive of all the projects on here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here in the first place and on this agenda. It was maybe the wrong place to mention an idea, but out of ideas, decisions are made, and things happen. So I don't make any apologies for that. Maybe the wrong meeting, but I am supportive. I'm supportive of all the projects that we're talking about here. It's just that we also got to protect the reputation of this LEP.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, sorry, I just need to apologise because I'm having real internet issues just this moment. So I apologise if I don't hear you properly, but I will try and make sure you have a place to speak. Councillor Chambers, and then Councillor Gledhill, do you want to just also come in quickly after that?
I understand what Ron is proposing, but I think it is far greater than for us to discuss here, because it's a matter of principle. Because there are a number of assumptions that could be attached to it which we do not know, because we do not know whether the government is going to provide further funding following Growth Fund. We hear a lot about the Shared Prosperity Fund and its distribution, but we hear a lot about it, but it's very short on details. So I think it's right that what Ron has raised is an issue, because it's a matter of principle and needs much more detail, and also needs a degree of commitment from the government to know whether we are going to get any funding, whatever means, that it's an issue for the board.
Thank you. Councillor Gledhill?
Thanks, Chair. I put mine in the chat. For some reason, my electronic hand wouldn't raise, which pretty much summed up exactly what you said, to go to the other board. And actually, the only other issue I was going to say, exactly what Rodney's just said about, we need to be sure if there is more money coming from government anyway. So it's been pretty much covered by the rest of the board from my views anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also see, I'm just going to repeat in the chat what Rosemary has said in the chat function, which not all the public can see, which is that she concurs with ensuring that all investments and associated programmes of work drive towards the top level outcomes we seek. So I think we're moving towards asking, are you all still there, or have I frozen?
We can still see you, Sarah. Oh no, I jinxed it.
You've frozen, Sarah.
Oh no.
Yeah, well done, Suzanne.
I lost her. Ree, do you want to step in, or do you want me to step in?
Shall I just, should we just run through, if the board members are happy for me to just run through these recommendations. So the board is asked to note the risks to the project delivery as a result of the outstanding applications and internal approvals set out in the report. The board is asked to agree that the 8.9 million local growth fund should remain allocated to the project. So if members could vote on that one, please. Okay, thank you. And there are just a few points to note. So note that under agenda item 15, the board will be asked to agree that the remaining 4.1 million unspent LGF will be transferred to Kent County Council by 31st of March 2021. And the transfer of this funding will be in the condition that planning consent is required for phases 1 and phases 3 by the 1st of September 2021. And note if that planning is not in place by that date, a further update will be reported back to the board on the 10th of September.
Thank you. I'm back in, hopefully.
You are.
You are. Back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for holding the forts. I don't know what happened there. I think it's too many children trying to get into online classes at the moment in my household. So thank you very much for bearing with me. Okay, let's move on, and thank you to Rhiannon for stepping into the breach. Let's move on to item 12 then, which is Bewley Park project update. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to update the board on the delivery risks surrounding the project, Bewley Park Station, and to agree one of two options. Following the last update to the board in October 2020, the project has now moved into what's called Governance in Rail Investment Projects, GRIP, that is, stage 4. And this is running in parallel with continued discussions around the detail of the grant determination agreement to secure the homes infrastructure funding, which forms the bulk of the funding for this project. In October 2020, the board agreed that if the full funding package was not in place by this February meeting, that local growth funding should be removed from the project. However, as set out in the report, progress has been made since October, although discussions around the grant determination agreement are ongoing and the full funding package is not currently contractually committed. We understand that these discussions on the HIF funding will need to conclude by the middle of 2021, or the housing infrastructure funding will be removed from the project. One of the stipulations of the housing infrastructure funding is that a full funding package must be in place, and the LGF allocation is a key element of that package. So that means that if the LGF is removed, then there will not be a fully funded package, and there is the possibility that the housing infrastructure funding may be at risk. So the board have one of two options to make. We've obviously made a recommendation, but back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Councillor Finch.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Howard, as well. I just the first meeting I had today was at 8:15 with Vicky Ford, the Minister for Children's, and also with Giles Watling, the MP for Clacton Tendring. Both of those are very keen, particularly Vicky Ford, on the Bewley Park station and railway line, because she's the MP for Chelmsford. In that meeting, we had a presentation from the Essex officers around the costs versus the HIF-BID funding, also the governance around the need to make sure that we're able to sign up to the agreement with the DFT, and also looking at the operating costs in terms of what would our liability be, given that in the original proposal we became liable for all the operating cost losses until a point in time that railway network was profitable or broke even. We've made considerable progress, as Howard has indicated, through GRIP 4, and we brought in Murphy's to work with us, and we have significantly reduced the variability in cost between the HIF funding and the estimates that have been put forward to us through that GRIP process. We're also moving swiftly in talking with the government DFT about the contract, and are now in a point in terms of the other operating costs that I just mentioned, that we're in a position of confidence. I've come from that meeting that of those three stages, two of them are strong green, and the last one is just a mild amber. So I have every confidence that we can continue with the project and that we will get the relevant cost reductions that we need, and that we will be signing up within the next few weeks the agreement with the government DFT on the HIF funding.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. It's very good to have that update. Are there any other questions or queries? So you have a recommended option in front of you, which is option 1. Are we okay to take that for consideration? So do we agree that I'm going to read it out just because I have to in due process, point of view, agree that the full allocation of 12 million LGF should remain allocated to the project? Do we agree that one?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agree that if Essex County Council and Homes England are unable to agree the conditions of the GDA, but the deadline for completion set out by HMG, the government, Her Majesty's Government, the allocation will be removed and reallocated by the Strategic Board. Do we agree that? Yeah. And we need to note that under our agenda item 15, the board will be asked to agree the 12 million LGF will be transferred to Essex County Council by the 31st of March 2021, ahead of the full funding being confirmed, and that the following specific conditions will be attached to the transfer of the funding, which is if the agreement between Essex County Council and Homes England can't be reached on the conditions of the GDA before the deadline set out, the LGFs will be returned to SELEP for reinvestment following the reallocation of funding by the Strategic Board. Thank you. Okay, let's move now on to item 13, which is the LGF update on the M2 junction 5. I'm handing over to Rhiannon for this. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, this project has been identified for investment previously. The board has previously supported a £1.6 million award to this project. At the time of that decision, the recommendation was that the board agreed that project, which they did, but it was subject to the Secretary of State approving the delivery of the project. The Secretary of State hasn't yet approved the project. It's gone for a DCO process, so it's been considered by the Planning Inspectorate, but the outcome of that has not been confirmed by the Secretary of State as of yet. So this puts us in a difficult position where we need to make sure we've spent the funding by the end of this financial year, but we don't yet have the outcome of that decision, and no strong sort of indication either way, or the timescales to which we expect that decision to be made. So in this paper, we're really asking the board to consider, should that £1.6 million contribution towards a larger scale project remain allocated to the project, or should that be reallocated to another project where there's a clearer schedule around the delivery of the project. So the request in this report is to confirm whether the £1.6 million should remain allocated to the project, and then under agenda item 15 we'll be considering the transfer of funding over to Kent County Council in relation to that project. If we do agree to transfer that funding, it will be on the condition that if the Secretary of State hasn't approved for the project by the 31st of March 2022, we would then look to recover that funding back from the authority if that project doesn't proceed. That was all I was going to say on that particular report.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley. You're on mute, Councillor Woodley.
Sorry, Rhiannon. Clarification, did you say by the 31st of March 2022?
So at the moment we don't have confirmation about when the Secretary of State will be making that decision. So we've put a date there that they've got to make sure. We'd like to see a confirmation by the Secretary of State that the project is fully supported. It'll be taken forward, the delivery, by Highways England, and it'll be a contribution towards that project. But we're really looking for confirmation that it will definitely proceed by that date.
All right, thank you. Thank
you. Councillor Goff.
Thank you. Yeah, just to say that I think this is one which again is somewhat out of our control, but it is dependent really, as you said, on the planning process and on the Secretary of State. In every other respect, I think it is proceeding as it should. It is a very important project because this particular junction, I think it's on Highways England's list of 50 of the most severe such junctions in terms of accidents around the country. So that has big implications, not just, obviously in human terms and our responsibilities in that area, but also more practical, or in terms of bringing it closer to the focus that this board has. It is now having a massive impact on potential development, and not even simply closely within that area, but knock-on effects right across anything linked to the strategic network in the county. So it is an important development. There is no particular sign that this is a high-risk project as such. It is simply dependent, as I say, on that one element. And it's perfectly clear too that there is a safeguard as far as SELEP is concerned if we accept, as I believe we clearly should, the provision that the money be transferred to Kent County Council now, but we would then return it to SELEP or to ECC as the accountable body were that condition not fulfilled.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Chris?
Yes, just to build on what Roger was saying, there is actually a very significant potential development at the Aylesford news site, those of you who know it, which is proposed by Panatoni, the big development company, which is around about a £180 million development, and there's about, I think, 3,000 jobs relying on it. That currently is being effectively blocked by Highways England because of a concern of a very minor increase, and it's actually doubtful there's an increase at all, of traffic using that particular junction on the M2. So that is an example of what Roger was saying, is that this is a very significant for development of that part of Kent, but also stretching into Medway, because Highways England are looking at developments with a radius of, I think it's 11 miles around that particular junction, which would clearly affect Medway as well as the part of Kent that I know very well. So it's really just endorsing what Roger is saying. This is an absolutely mission critical junction, and does need for the development of a significant part of Kent and Medway.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any other comments or queries? I know apparently some people don't have the kind of raise hand function. So if you did, just wave your hand. If you do want to speak, wave your hands on the camera if you want to say anything, just in case you haven't got that functionality. Okay, so we have a recommended option in front of us, I believe. Is that right? Oh no, we have two options in front of us, sorry, no, not one specifically recommended. So there's option 1, which I will read out first, and if we agree that I won't go on to option 2. So option 1 is agree that the 1.6 million LGF should remain allocated to the project, and to remove the condition for the Secretary of State approval of the project needing to be in place prior to the funding being transferred to Kent County Council. Do we agree that? Okay. And note that under agenda item 15, the board will be asked to agree that the 1.6 million LGF should be transferred to Kent County Council by the 31st of March, and that if the Secretary of State doesn't approve the project by the 31st of March 2022, the 1.6 million LGF must be returned to SELEP for alternative investment. The board is asked to agree this condition on the transfer of the LGF under item 15. So we agree option 1, so I'm not going to read out option 2. Great, thank you. Okay, I just want to move quickly to item 14, and then we'll have a short break, and maybe my internet will recover a bit better during that break. So can we move on to item 14, which is on the delivery of an update on the delivery of the University of Essex Parkside 3, the M11 Junction 8, and the Innovation Parkway Medway phases 2 and 3. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the purpose of this report picks up three LGF projects, and it's for Accountability Board to receive an update on those projects. They previously were identified as high-risk projects, and the risks have now been addressed or are close to being mitigated, and they include the University of Essex Parkside 3, the M11 Junction 8, which was mentioned by Councillor Finch earlier, and the Innovation Park Medway phases 2 and 3. So starting with the university, they have now confirmed that both a full funding package and planning are in place to deliver the project, which involves the delivery of an additional 4,772 square metres of accommodation at the successful Parkside Office Village. And the 5 million of LGF would be transferred to Essex County Council for the delivery of this project beyond the 31st of March 2021. So that's a simple one. The M11 Junction 8 funding has been confirmed by the scheme promoters. There is a decision, again mentioned earlier by Councillor Finch, a decision will be taken at full council meeting at Essex County Council on the 23rd of February. And in addition, the project is seeking an additional 1 million of LGF, and this report will be presented to the board in March. Rhiannon mentioned that a bit earlier. The revised business case is currently being assessed by the independent technical evaluator, and a verbal update will be given to the board on the full council decision at that meeting as well. The project will deliver improvements to the junction, supporting both expansion of Stansted Airport and housing growth in northwest Essex and eastern Hertfordshire. And the third project, the Innovation Park Medway, phases 2 and 3. Previously, concerns were brought to the attention of the board that the local development order required to deliver the project was not in place, The LDO has now been approved by Medway Council. However, as the site is on the boundary of Medway and Tunbridge and Malling, hopefully I pronounced that right, the LDO also needs to be approved by Tunbridge and Malling. The report actually at 5.7, there's a slight error in the dates, apologies for that. The cabinet meeting at Tunbridge and Malling took place, in fact, on the 26th of January, where it did endorse the LDO, but it does need to go to full council, and that will be on the 23rd of February to provide final approvals. We'll give a verbal update at the March board meeting. The LGF for this project will support the delivery of infrastructure works, and it's expected to attract further private sector investment as set out in the report. So the balance of the 4 million LGF will be transferred to Medway Council, subject to agreement of the LDO by Tunbridge and Malling at the full council meeting. That's what I'm going to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments, queries? Councillor Chambers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I just want to make a comment on Innovation Park Medway. And also I want to relate it back to the previous item on Junction 5, because here we go again. We could have been in this position as far as Innovation Park Medway is concerned a year ago. And the delay has been Highways England and the tardy way they go about their discussions with the appropriate authorities. And I just hope that the project that was mentioned that they're now saying will put pressure on Junction 5, they don't go through the same experience that we went through with Highways England, because they said that the Innovation Park Medway was putting pressure on Junction 3. Okay, we finally got to an agreement, but it was exceedingly protracted, exceedingly drawn out, and therefore it rather put the project at risk as a result of that. And I just want to say, here's yet another example of the government putting a time limit on spend, but it doesn't actually put pressure on its own agencies to cooperate so that we can get that spend and meet those spending deadlines. And I just feel that this is something that perhaps we've learnt at the LEP, and we need to continue to put pressure on the government to actually get its own house in order and its departments in order to cooperate with the various promoters of these projects so that we can meet the government's own deadline for spend.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Rosemary.
Yes, just to put my view from higher education, which I'm here to represent in these delays and the impact they have on our ability to drive what is known as knowledge exchange across the 9 universities within the SELEP region. And some of these projects and programmes are very closely linked to that, and they influence local growth and regeneration, public and community engagement, and future workforce development. So the lack of the ecosystem and connectivity that Rodney has just outlined is very, very vital from our perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. And it is, as Councillor Chambers pointed out, something that we have highlighted several times in the board meetings here about those challenges. And absolutely, I think it is incumbent upon us as the LEP to continue to campaign for fast decisions on these matters. And I'm sure that Chris and I will take that forward as well. So thank you. Unless there are any other comments, I would like to take it forward. So do we agree that the University of Essex Park Site 3 project continue? This follows confirmation that previous planning and funding conditions issues have now been resolved. We agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Note that under agenda item 5, the board will be asked to agree 15, sorry, that the 5 million LGF grant be transferred to Essex County Council for the delivery of the University of Essex Parkside Phase 3 beyond 31st of March 2021. Do we agree that sufficient assurance has been provided by Essex County Council that the M11 Junction 8 project funding gap will be addressed and that a £0.495 million LGF should remain allocated to the project? And a further update will be brought to the board in March 2021. Do you agree that?
Agreed.
Thank you. And we need to note that all funding conditions have now been satisfied for the Innovation Park Medway phases 2 and 3, and that under agenda item 15, the board will be asked to agree that the remaining 4 million unspent LGF allocated to the Innovation Park Medway phases 2 and 3 will be transferred to Medway Council for spend beyond 31st of March 2021. The transfer of this funding will be subject to the local development order having been approved by Tonbridge and Malling Borough Council on the 16th of February 2021. Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you. All right, now I'm going to suggest that we have a short break, so 10 minutes. So if we could come back at 11:50, please, to go through the rest of the items, and I hope you'll get a chance to get a quick cup of coffee. Thank you very much. I'll see you in a moment.
Go on.
How are the children coping with online learning, Sarah?
Well, it's remarkably well, actually. I think it's challenging. I'm very lucky that my kids aren't primary school age, I think is what I keep telling myself.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's a different experience. But
certainly tested your bandwidth, that's for sure.
Certainly has. Even though we have fibre here, it's just sometimes really struggles. Makes me realise how difficult it must be for so very many people who don't have the luck of having fibre down their road.
What speeds do you get then, Sarah?
Oh, you're going to ask me something technical I don't know the answer to, but it's Virgin. It's Virgin Media we're with, and it's meant to be the fastest one, but we still occasionally struggle. But that's the joy of having 4 children, I suppose.
Yeah, that must deplete many things, including broadband,
Yep.
and then the other, and free time as well, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Patience.
Well, I didn't want to go that way.
It's hard enough with 2.
Yeah. I'm used to it now. Right. Are we more or less back? We're back to chorus, aren't we? Are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, we are.
Yeah, sorry, everyone kept moving around then for a second. It's like...
I know. I had the same. So let's kick off again, if that's all right with everybody. Okay, so let's move on to item 15, which is a report to consider the LGF cash flow position at the end of 2021. Rhiannon, I'm going to hand over to you for this.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this pulls together all the previous discussion we've had around the high-risk projects and the award of funding. So at the end of this financial year, we're intending to transfer the remaining balance held by SELEP over to local authorities based on the remaining balance held against these projects. So we've got £77.4 million that's due to be spent beyond the growth door period, and that the intention is to transfer that across. What we're not doing is, again, I'll just reiterate this, is we're not transferring the additional funding against that we've received from the Department of Transport, because that's got specific conditions against those projects where it can only be spent on those specific projects. So we're just talking about the portion of LGF that we receive from Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, rather than that Department of Transport figure. The proposal set out in this report is to agree that that funding will be transferred. It can then either be swapped into a local authority's own capital programme, something we refer to in the report as an option 4 capital swap, or it can be held as a ring-fence grant within the local authority accounts. It's up to Section 151 officers to determine which approach of those 2 they wish to use. But there have been a lot of conversations with between the accountable body with Section 151 officers within each authority to confirm that they are happy with that approach. And the Section 151 officer from each authority has provided that confirmation that they are willing to accept the grant in advance, as set out within this report. As we've said previously, so there are conditions against this funding as we transfer it. We've updated all of our service level agreements over the last few months to make sure it's very, very clear about how much has been transferred against which project. There are clawback clauses within that agreement, which mean if the projects don't proceed to delivery, the funding could be clawed back by this board and by the accountable body. And again, there's conditions within there if there's a change to the project, so whether that was a change of scope or just delays to the project of greater than 6 months, again, that would need to come back to this board for a decision. So there are sort of conditions in there where we feel comfortable that we're transferring this funding, but maintaining that oversight by SELEP and this board as well over these projects. The previous decisions have all gone through as per the recommendations of the report. So the figures presented in this report are accurate at the current time. What we expect will happen, there might be some slippage from the spend we're expecting to happen during this financial year into next financial year as we come to year end. So again, the board's asked to agree that if there's additional slippage identified between this year and next year, next financial year, that is incorporated either as option 4 swap, or that funding is held as by the local authorities as a ring-fence grant. I think that was everything, so happy to take any questions on this.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Goff.
Thank you. It was just to clarify how, I think we've got the table 1, which does give you the amount of LGF to be swapped in effect. But clearly there needs to be some mechanism, I think it's touched on there, as to how this might vary and might increase or decrease from what we've got in the table. But I'm not quite sure how that's done. Can we just be clear on that?
Thank you, Rhiannon.
So we've confirmed what we see as kind of the draft figures of what we're expecting to be spent in future years. The decision, the way we've worded it for today's meeting, is that the board, sorry, just bear with me, bring this up. I think we've built flexibility into the, here we go. So the board's asked to agree that where the LGF has been transferred to the partners and there's unplanned slippage from this financial year into next financial year, this should be added to the value of the option 4 capital swap or the local growth fund that's held by the local authority as a ring fence grant. So that means that if there's additional changes within the next month or so, that value can be added into the mitigation that's put in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. As I said at the beginning, I think we just need to be quite thoughtful about the audit trail that we need around this, the sorts of documentation that the Accountability Board should require properly, and also what the Strategic Board should require properly. So the audit trail would be a Section 151 officer letter, I think, that recording the amount of money that's being transferred and the various different pots for the projects, and we should have at least have some sort of oversight, I think, over the legal architecture that is put in place or will be put in place at the time the money is transferred, i.e. no later than 31st March 2021, to make sure that all that that we get assurance that all that Rhiannon has just described is actually put in place. I think certainly the Strategic Board should have oversight of that to make sure that we can all be satisfied that it's been done and properly signed off. But again, I would have thought it was even more important, really, the Accountability Board should also have sight, or have the ability to have sight of that audit trail and legal architecture.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you, Rhiannon.
Yeah, so I suppose we do have a timing issue here. We're on the 12th of February and there are only limited number of meetings. Sorry, if we held off until the Strategic Board meeting, there'd be very limited time to be able to transfer that funding. There wouldn't be time to transfer that funding in effect. What we have done though previously in the meeting, I believe it was October last year, the Strategic Board did have sight of the draft service level agreement that will be put in place between SELEP accountable body and partners and SELEP Limited that's been entered into. So I do believe the Strategic Board has had that oversight and has agreed the conditions of that SLA previously. What I think might be sensible, however, is taking on board Chris' comments there, is make sure we've got that very clear audit trail written out in a report for the Strategic Board, so we can provide that assurance. These are the steps that we've taken, and the conditions that remain over the funding.
So, Sarah, if I could just respond to that.
Yep.
I guess it's you could take the boy out of the law, but you can't take the law out of the boy, because I used to be a lawyer. You need to, I mean, the money will be transferred on or before 31st March 2021. And I do think that having draft agreements is not sufficient. I think those agreements do need to be in place at the time the money is transferred. Otherwise, they may never get, we won't know definitely that they will have been put in place or when they will be put in place. So I think, certainly from a Strategic Board point of view, I think we would be asking for the agreements to be in place and signed at the time the money goes across. Otherwise, we've sort of lost control of the situation. And I would have thought that I would suggest the accountability board would want the same.
Sorry.
Absolutely. I think Rhiannon, I think there was a confusion that Rhiannon was saying that a draft SLA had gone to the accountability board in October,
Right.
and that actually by the time of the transfer of funding, all legal agreements will have been signed.
That's fine. So I think
that if there was a change to the SLA, if we wanted to change the SLA, and it only went to the full detail of the SLA only went to the board meeting, there wouldn't be enough time to transfer the monies. Is that what you were saying, Rhiannon?
Yeah, sorry, if I could just clarify that point. A draft of the service over agreement was reviewed by Strategic Board before it was entered into, but that has now been entered into. It's been signed by all of the local authority partners. There's some that require signature still from our side, but that will be absolutely in place before we transfer the funding. There's also an action following this board meeting where we've got projects where we're adding to the programme. So some of the funding decisions under earlier agenda items where we're increasing the allocation to those projects. Again, variation agreements will be put in place for those projects before we transfer the funding. And that work is ongoing by legal sort of as we speak, really, to get those make sure we can do that before the funding leaves our accounts.
Thank you. Chris, does that address?
Yes, I think so. I mean, as long as the agreements are in place and have been signed, and that we have the confirmation that all is in order from the Section 151 officer, then I'm happy. Yes, thank you. If that's, it sounds like there's quite a lot of work to be done, and a short period of time to do it. So,
and a challenging time to do it in.
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
Stephanie, did you want to come in here? I saw you turned your camera on, so I didn't.
I was only going to provide assurance to the board that the accountable body, of course, will not transfer the funding unless the appropriate agreements have been signed and are in place. That's the way we always work with the transfer of funds, and it will probably be sensible for the strategic board to just have as a reminder the visibility of the agreements as part of the March paper.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Simon and then Councillor Woodley.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, three broad points. I think first and foremost, it looks like a no-brainer, notwithstanding the audit issues that Chris and others have talked about. It does make me wonder why we don't do this, why we can't do this in other circumstances. It looks really simple and straightforward, particularly in the complexities of our devolved LEP region. So that's just a view, I guess, and I just wonder whether it's an experiment that may well then work more effectively in other examples later on rather than individual projects. But then I guess my third point really is what I'm not clear about, outside of the transfer of money, what I'm not clear about are risks and duties in terms of the accountabilities for the spending of that money on projects, and then what happens 6, 12, 18 months down the road, particularly bearing in mind that we've got a lot of projects that even now we know are going well over. So I guess it's more about the risks of our accountabilities once that money is transferred. And I know when I asked that question earlier, everybody said we don't lose it, but I'd like to know what that is actually. It doesn't stop the decision for me, but I'd like to know what those accountabilities are and how then we go through the process of keeping an eye on that.
Thank you, Simon. Rhiannon, are you able, or Suzanne, to answer these?
Yeah, so the conditions of the service over agreement in place have very specific conditions around the reporting, so the ongoing reporting and evaluation of the projects, as well as the assurances that if projects are not progressing, there are clawback clauses within those agreements. And as I said, any changes to those projects, whether that be any changes to certain aspects of the scope, if they couldn't proceed, that would all need to come back to the board for further decision, along with any extensions by more than 6 months over those projects. So, and that, each project is now listed very specifically within the SLA with specific allocations against those projects. So I do think we've got sufficient clauses within that, and we have had those assurances from our legal partners in the accountable body that we could recover the funding if things were not progressing as set out with, in accordance with the accountability board's decision making. Yeah, I don't know if Suzanne, you wanted to add anything, but I think we've had those assurances back from the council body that remain comfortable with the agreements.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered it very fulsomely, Rhi, but I just to sort of reiterate really that the responsibilities and the role of this board remain exactly the same for all of the projects that are listed here. Nothing changes on that point, and that's very clear in all the legal agreements that that the roles and the responsibilities of the respective parties are laid out, and it's clear that any change needs to come back here, and the oversight remains here with this board.
Thank you both. Simon, does that answer some of your queries? Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Woodley, sorry, Councillor Woodley, apologies.
That's all right. I may be all this. Are we making something very complicated here? We're going to transfer the money to the local authorities, totally agree with. And then it should be, this is against the projects that they've put the bidding into and the funding been allocated for. But now we're saying, but they can then swap it for another capital project. The risk associated with that, if we're looking at a government situation, is, well, why are we supplying money for other capital projects and you're not meeting the capital projects that you allocated the money for? I think that's very complicated. We transfer the money fine, and it should be ring-fenced around those projects that we as authorities have asked for that money in the first place. You keep swapping it around for this project or that project, you're going to lose control of it.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Rhiannon?
Yeah, so option 4 capital swap, I mean, it was a principle agreed in the very, very early stages of the programme. We've implemented this since 2015 because of, in that very first year of the programme, there is a requirement of spend the money or lose it. So it's a case of transferring it over to the local authority programmes with very specific conditions and requirements that funding is then, that investment is then paid for by the local authority through its own capital programme in future years of the programme. Following the end of each financial year, we seek written assurances from Section 151 officers of each authority about how that funding's actually been applied. And again, that reaffirming their commitments to repay that funding back to the actual LGF project in future years of the programme. So the conditions are very specific within the agreements to enable us to do this. We've done this for several years. And again, the Section 151 officers have written to confirm firstly that they're happy with this principle, but also to reaffirm they understand the conditions and responsibilities that are put on them by agreeing to implement this option 4 swap and the process around that. So again, it's a sort of accounting exercise that takes place and with the assurances that it will not impact the delivery of the project.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, just to come in sort of beyond, building on what Reece said, it was a mechanism that was originally suggested to us by government in the early part of the programme, a mechanism that's been used by other LEPs. As we move now towards the end of the programme, where we've got some very specific projects, then I think we can see the move to where we're ring fencing it more, but it's still there as an option and was an option in the SLA. It is quite a technical kind of accounting approach, and there are safeguards put into those SLAs to ensure that the projects will get their funding once we've got over that end of the line. So it is complicated and it is a bit technical, but we feel quite comfortable, and I think the accountable body feel quite comfortable. I won't speak for Steph, I'll let her come in, but I feel quite comfortable that there isn't really a risk that it swaps out and then doesn't come back. We've got the safeguards there just to make sure that it does come back and the projects continue, and we can focus on the delivery and ensuring that the delivery of those projects is the key thing that we can be discussing in future, rather than sort of the technicalities of how we go through the year-end process. Steph, I don't know if you did want to come in.
Thanks, Suzanne. I think Suzanne has really sort of covered it, and Rhi as well. From the accountable body's perspective, this just enables the funding to be transferred and leaves accounting flexibilities for the authorities holding the money to use that funding, but the onus is very much on them through the agreements to deliver those projects and those programs, and so that assurance still comes back to you as the board.
Thank you, Stephanie. So the challenge to us as a board and to the LEP board as well, the strategic board more generally, is that we are monitoring these projects on an ongoing basis, that they are delivering, that any time scale slippage, that, you know, any changes to those projects are brought back to this account, to the strategic board and the accountability board for sign off, that we agree. So actually, if I'm understanding correctly, so I'm trying to sum it up in my simple terms, which is, because I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, which is that that actually we have as much oversight on those projects as we would have even if we hadn't transferred the money, because they would be called back in by us if those local authorities were not delivering those projects. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, that's right, Sarah. And if those projects are not delivered, then SELEP can seek that funding to be returned and to then be applied to other projects.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thank you. So, for instance, if I put something, say a project is worth 10 million, we've retransferred the money over and it comes in at 9.5 million. How do we control the £500,000 that was less?
As a change to the project, that would then need to be brought to the attention of the accountability board for them to return the funding and for SELEP to determine how that is then reinvested.
Thank you.
Basically, what you're saying is we've got to trust our 151 officers with our money. Is that it?
Yes, the assurances are put on Section 151 officers from each of the authorities. Yeah.
I would hope
that is their role.
And that's
sorry, Stephanie.
No, I was just going to endorse your point, Sarah. That is their role, and I would hope, therefore, you would trust them. They have a statutory duty to deliver that advice appropriately.
And that is the case at the moment as well. We placed assurance on all the reporting that comes in that's signed off by the Section 151 officers at the moment. So again, that's a continuing arrangement.
Thank you. I think it's a really important discussion to have.
There'll be a statutory duty plus a contractual duty. So you've got both contract and statute. So it should, I think, Ron, we sort of double covered.
Yeah. I think what we need to do is ensure that we bring reports back to the board as and when needed on this, and that, you know, we are all mindful of the timescales under which it has been agreed to deliver the projects, and we are continuing to monitor things carefully. Okay, does that answer your queries, Ron and Simon, Councillor Woodley and Simon? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, do we agree that a variation to the service level agreements be made to enable the unspent LGF held by local authorities at the end of 31st of March 2021 to either be invested as an option for capital swap within local authorities' own capital programmes as defined in 3.4, or for the funding to be held by the local authorities as a ring-fenced grant? Agree? I see your hand. Thank you. Note that the value of the unspent LGF is expected to total £77.418 million at the end of 2020-21, excluding the DFT retained scheme funding as set out in Table 1. Agreed that the remaining unspent LGF is transferred to local authorities by the 31st of March 2021, subject to the funding conditions for the individual projects listed in Table 2 having been satisfied, and with the specific funding conditions being attached to the transfer of funding for Bewley Park, Maidstone Integrated Transport Package and M2 Junction 5 set out in Table 3. Do we agree? Thank you. Agree that the unspent LGF held by local authorities at the end of 2020-2021 be spent within their own local authority capital programme by the 31st of March 2021 as an option for capital swap, or held by the local authority as a ring fence grant. Agreed? Thank you. Agree that where LGF that has already been transferred to the local authorities and remains unspent at the end of 2020-21 due to unplanned slippage of LGF from 2021 to 21-22. This should be added to the value of the option 4 capital swap or held by the local authority as a ring-fenced grant. That's agreed. Can I see your hand, please? Thank you. And note that if the delivery of a project for which LGF has been transferred is delayed by more than 6 months relative to the completion date set out in the original business case, or the revised completion date subsequently agreed by the board through a change request, a further decision will be brought back to the board to consider the project change. This will include consideration for the potential clawback of funding. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on now to item 16, which is to consider the GBF cash flow position at the end of 2020-21. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a fairly similar report to the one we've just considered, but looking at the Getting Building Fund programme instead. At the March board meeting, we'll bring back a full update on where we are with that programme. There just wasn't time on the agenda today to go through that in detail. But here we're just looking at the cash flow again and how we transfer this funding. So we received our first tranche. We're due to receive 2 equal instalments at £42.5 million. We will receive this year. We're provisionally allocated the same in value next financial year, although we haven't yet had that confirmed, that funding for next year, because the way the government transferred the funding on an annual basis. So the proposal here is, at the start of this financial year, we were due to spend approximately £33 million of that Getting Building Fund. The government actually transferred more than we were ever forecasting to spend. So we're always due to have a slippage of funding between this financial year and next financial year. But that hard deadline still remains around spending this funding by the 31st of March 2022. So the proposal here, very much like with the Local Growth Fund, is to demonstrate the spend of that £42.5 million we've received to date by again transferring it across the local authorities, either for them to implement an option 4 capital swap or to hold the funding as an unring-fenced grant, or to actually spend on the Getting Building Fund projects themselves. So the report sets out the values which we're intending to transfer to each of the authorities. We're not intending to transfer funding where there are outstanding conditions that need to be met. So there are 3 specific projects where there's outstanding conditions that get around planning. So we'll not be transferring funding against those projects, but the local authorities can spend, against the other projects there. Just to reiterate that point, so around the next year's funding, so we haven't yet received that confirmation. That is dependent on the outcome of our annual performance review. We've had sort of draft outcomes of that, which are looking positive, but we do need to make sure we're demonstrating that we are spending the money we've got. And I do think that might be taken into consideration when they're then looking at transferring the final tranche of the Getting Building Fund. So yeah, fairly kind of similar process. We'll have service level agreements that are all signed with the local authorities, and we'll then be transferring the funding to the local authorities under those agreements for the delivery of these projects. So I'm happy to take any questions on this paper, but it should be a fairly similar decision to the one just previous.
Thank you. So are there any questions or comments? No? Okay, thanks. So do we agree that a variation to the service level agreements be made to enable the unspent GBF held by local authorities at the end of 31st of March 2021 to either be invested as an option 4 capital swap within local authorities' own programme, or for the funding to be held by the local authorities as a ring-fenced grant? Are we agreeing that? Can I see your hands? If so, please. Thank you. Agree the updated GBF spend forecast for 2020-21 of £20.423 million on GBF projects as set out in Appendix A. Do we agree that amount of money and table? Thank you. Agree to the transfer of the advance payment of £9.490 million GBF to local authorities in 2020-21. This is in addition to the £33.010 million GBF agreed in November 2020. So do we agree that extra amount? Thank you. Do we agree that the unspent GBF held by local authorities at the end of 2021 must either be spent within their own local authority capital programme by the 31st of March 2021 as an option for capital swap, or held by the local authority as a ring-fence grant? Not agreed. Thank you. And agree that any unspent GBF held by local authorities at the end of 2020-21 due to further slippage of GBF from 2020-21 to 21-22 should be added to the value of option 4 capital swap or held by the local authority as a ring-fenced grant. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Okay. Let's move on swiftly to item 17, which is the Growing Places Fund update. Helen.
Thank you. So this report and the appendices provide the usual update on the delivery of the Growing Places Fund programme. So I'm just going to mostly focus on the points that are listed under the recommendations. So the report highlights a decision taken by Strategic Board in December 2020 to amend the GPF project pipeline to facilitate accelerated investment of the available GPF funding. This decision was brought forward due to delays experienced by a project which had originally been prioritised by the Strategic Board for investment. The project has remained on the pipeline and will be brought forward for investment once the issues have been addressed. The Strategic Board also agreed that if a project cannot proceed within 6 months of a funding allocation becoming available, that the Accountability Board can award funding to the next project on the pipeline so as to facilitate swift investment of the GPF funding. So under the next agenda item, the board will be asked to consider the award of GPF funding to the Barnhorn Green Commercial and Health Development Project. This project originally sought GPF investment of £3.5 million. However, when the GPF prioritised project pipeline was considered by Strategic Board in June 2020, it was proposed that the project be split into 2 phases, with each phase receiving GPF investment totalling £1.75 million. So the next agenda item covers the award of the first £1.75 million allocated to the project. Subsequently, Rother District Council, as the delivery partner, have decided to bring the Barnhorn Green project forward in its entirety in 1 phase. So this means with the remaining project cost is now being funded through Public Works Loan Board borrowing and a small local contribution. This wasn't originally considered to be a viable option due to a significant rise in PWLB interest rates. However, these interest rates have now reduced, meaning that it's viable to deliver the project in 1 phase with reduced GPF investment. So therefore the board are asked to agree the removal of Barnhorn Green Phase 2 from the GPF project pipeline. The report sets out a proposed revised repayment schedule for the Javelin Way project. Delivery of the project has commenced and the intended repayment mechanism is through the sale of the industrial units which will be delivered as part of the project. However, it's anticipated that as a result of market uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, that the current sales values of the industrial units will be adversely impacted. It's therefore proposed that the sale of the industrial units is delayed until the market has recovered. And for this reason, a revised repayment schedule has been brought forward to the board for consideration. Should the market recover quicker than anticipated, accelerated repayment of the GPF loan will be made. And finally, the report identifies the risks of the repayment schedule for the Centre for Advanced Engineering project. This project has been successfully delivered. However, due to the impacts of COVID-19 on their income, South Essex College have now indicated that they won't be able to meet the agreed repayment schedule, which required full repayment of the loan in 21-22. It is expected that the college will bring forward a revised repayment schedule for consideration by the board in early 21-22. In the meantime, the board are asked to note the risks of the repayment schedule for the project. I will stop there unless anyone has any queries.
Thank you, Helen. Comments, questions on any of that? Councillor Gough.
Sure, thank you. It's a more general question, which is with the, I think the report states there's 15 million or so being carried over into 21-22. So what is the point at which those schemes which are sort of high up on the next stages of the list, so I think that includes things like the Cockle Wharf, includes No Use Empty, and I think there's one other which at the moment escapes me, but the Observer Building, the next phase of that. When would they be able to present to the board, present their case to the board for that? And would we also be looking for going out for more bids for GPF early in the new financial year?
Thank you, Councillor Bill. Rhiannon? Helen?
So the award of funding to the next projects on the pipeline, which are Cockle Wharf and the Observer Building, are dependent upon the forecast repayments being received at the end of this financial year. If the repayments expected are received, then they'll be able to come forward at the first accountability board in the new financial year, which is likely to be July now, I believe.
Because of what we said about, sorry to interject, because of what we said about the May meeting earlier. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Whilst there is £15 million being carried forward, some of that is already allocated to the projects which have already been considered by the board. So projects which are drawing down funding next year, their allocation is included in that 15 million. In relation to your second question about whether we would be seeking new Growing Places Fund projects.
Yes, only call for projects, yeah.
Yes, as the pipeline is quite short now, we will potentially be looking for a new round of Growing Places Fund funding. Probably not at the start of the new financial year, but during the new financial year, we will be looking to bring forward a new round of funding, and that will obviously go through the normal processes of a process going via strategic board for agreement in the first case.
Okay, and sorry, forgive me if I may just press a little on that. So not right at the start of the financial year, but presumably some point reasonably soon within the financial year. When roughly would we think of doing that call for projects?
Should I come in, Helen?
Okay.
So I suppose once we've understood the exact repayments that have been made, obviously we've got the forecast, but we would like to see the money in the bank account before we then go on and commit the funding to other projects. So I suppose Q2, Q3 would start to initiate that process. I suspect that the funding wouldn't be more like 2022, 2023 when the next the funding will actually be ready to draw down. But I think it's right that we've got the pipeline ready to go. So we're aware of those investments. I suppose it also links in what happens with other funding streams as well. And, if there are other calls, other funding opportunities available, we might want to do something, wider than that, perhaps looking at wider investment priorities, given the fact that the Local Growth Fund programme will be ending and the Getting Building Fund will be ending at the end of next year as well. I think, Suzanne, did you want to come in as well?
So I was just going to say, as the hopefully the economy stabilises, we can have some more certainty about the repayments. At the moment, the repayments obviously are a lot more uncertain than they would have been in previous years. But I hope as we move into recovery, then we become more certain of those repayments, and then we can go out with hopefully a bigger pot, because we're more certain of what's going to come in. So we'll be able to actually think about more projects coming forward. So we would just like to see us move into that recovery stage of the economy, which I'm sure we're all hoping comes soon now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Simon, and then Councillor Simmons.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I just wanted to speak just to this Centre for Advanced Manufacturing South Essex College particularly, just to support what's in the paper there really. And I think ironically, South Essex College have been one of those who have led the way on growing apprenticeship provision. And of course, it's apprenticeship provision that has been hit the hardest during this pandemic, with many businesses laying off and furloughing their apprenticeship. So I just wanted to support that content that was in there and provided just a little bit of added context and flavour. I have no doubt that will not impact on their ability in the long term, but certainly in the short term, that's been a big hit for them, particularly going into an area that we would like more people to go into.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just to reassure colleagues that East Sussex endorses the Rother District Council agreement to remove phase 2 of the Barnham Green Commercial and Health Development from the GPF pipeline, as the project already awarded funding under item 18 will be delivering the full benefits of the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so unless there are any other comments, I'd like us to note that the updated position on the GBF programme and the decision by the strategic to amend GPF project pipeline to allow the available GPF to retain pipeline for further GPF investment. Sorry, my internet's gone again, isn't it? Can you still hear me? Just about. Sorry, everyone looks frozen on my screen at the moment. But I'll continue. And note the decision by a strategic board to agree that if a project cannot proceed within 6 months, that it remains on the GPF project pipeline, but that the board can award funding to the next project in the pipeline in order to facilitate the swift investment of GPF funding. We agree. Do we then also agree the removal of Barnhorn Green Commercial and Health Development Phase 2 project from the GPF project pipeline? Can I see your hands, please? Thank you. Approve the revised repayment schedule for the Javelin Way project and agree that despite repayments not being made in line with the original repayment schedule, no interest will be charged on the loan. Do we approve that? Thank you. And note the identified risks, the repayment schedule for the Centre for Advanced Engineering project. Okay, thanks. Let's move now on to item 18, which is the award of Growing Places funding. Helen, 2 new projects here.
Yes, thank you. So this report seeks approval for the award of Growing Places Fund funding to the Barnhorn Green Commercial and Health Development project in East Sussex and the No Use Empty Commercial Phase 2 project in Kent. So Barnhorn Green is an allocated employment and health zone adjacent to a large housing development in Bexhill. The ability to deliver new homes in the area has been significantly hindered by a lack of sufficient primary healthcare provision. And therefore the project will see the delivery of a doctor's surgery on the site. In addition, office accommodation and light industrial workspace will be delivered. The project is seeking GPF investment of 1.75 million. It is noted in the report that full planning consent has not yet been granted for the proposed works. Whilst outline planning permission was granted in 2013, this consent has now lapsed for submission of reserved matters applications. Therefore, it is expected that a full planning application will be submitted in April 2021 with a decision to follow in July. This is considered to be low risk as the principle for development on the site has been established. However, it is recommended that the GPF funding be awarded on the basis that the loan will be withdrawn if planning consent is not granted. This condition will be reflected in the legal agreement entered into with East Sussex County Council. The No Use Empty Commercial Phase 2 project is seeking GPF investment of £2 million. The project will offer secured loans to bring empty commercial properties back into use for alternative commercial, residential or mixed use purposes. In February 2018, the board approved the award of £1 million GPF to support the No Use Empty Commercial Phase 1 project. This GPF funding has been fully invested and the majority of the works now completed. Additional GPF funding is being sought to enable the continuation of the No Use Empty Commercial project. In the report, it sets out a number of uncertainties which arise as a nature of the project. As the properties to be improved through the funding have not yet been identified, it is not possible at this stage to confirm the project outcomes or private sector funding contributions. However, the No Use Empty scheme has a strong track record of delivery dating back 15 years, and Phase 1 of the No Use Empty Commercial project has outperformed expectations in terms of delivery of project benefits. The independent technical evaluator has reviewed both business cases and has indicated that in their opinion, both projects offer high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. And I'll stop there unless there's any queries.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any comments or queries on these 2 projects? No? Okay, so do we approve the award of £1,750,000 GPF by way of a loan to support the delivery of the Barnhorn Green Commercial and Health Development project Phase 1 as set out in Appendix C, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. Noting that if planning consent is not granted, that the project will be removed from the GPF programme, requiring immediate repayment of any funding already drawn down against the project to facilitate the reallocation of funding through the GPF project pipeline. And 2 million GPF by way of a loan to support the delivery of the no-use empty commercial phase 2 project as set out in Appendix D, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with high certainty of achieving this. Do we all approve that?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to item 19, which is an update on the revenue forecast for 2020. I'm handing it over to Lorna now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report, there's no decisions in the report, but it gives an update on the latest financial forecast for SELEP in 2021. Overall, the position hasn't moved significantly from the position we presented back in November to the board in its overall position, and it's currently sort of showing a net underspend of 141,000 for this financial year, the reasons for which are set out in the report. This positive position means that we can hopefully take a lower withdrawal from reserves to support this year's budget, down to 586,000 at the end of the year. This position also gives us some confidence with regard to our budget that was agreed back in November for 21-22, as we're placing reliance on our level of reserves in that year's budget to support the budget overall in that year quite significantly. We have flagged a potential opportunity in the report with regard to additional income that might be received from our external interest, which is the funds held by the funds held in relation to the capital projects for LGF and GBEF primarily. At this stage, we haven't built that additional income into the forecast. We're still working that through with our Treasury Management team. But we've been keeping careful eye on that, because obviously interest receipts in this year have been significantly lower than in previous years because of the challenge with regards to interest rates. But hopefully by the end of the year we may be able to increase that level of income in that respect. But just to flag, really the key risk of moving into next year's budget relates to the lack of confirmation of our core revenue funding from government. Hopefully following the annual performance review, we'll see a positive outcome in that respect. But until that happens, we've got a sort of potential funding gap. And if they shouldn't allocate that funding out to us, then obviously we'll need to review the budget position into next financial year. But I wasn't planning to say anything more than that at this stage, but happy to take any questions or anything specific in the report.
Thank you, Lorna. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lorna. I just wondered if we could bring something back to the next meeting around what the position of councils or authorities in funding the Secretariat will be based upon the amount of monies that was allocated to each authority for their projects. And maybe that could be the way forward to help fund. So if we have an idea of that, we can then all look at it and say to ourselves whether that's a good idea or not a good idea. Because it does seem to me that it's unfair to certain authorities the amount of money they're paying, where other authorities like myself, actually Southend. So I'm putting my hand up here that I think we may need to look at that percentage of funding we get through the SELEP, and then base the contributions to the Secretariat based on that as a percentage, and what that would look like.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. I believe you mentioned this last meeting, I think, if I remember rightly. Lorna, Suzanne, do you want to comment on this?
So it was mentioned back in November, yes, and at that point we did commit that that when we review the budget position based on the when we get the confirmation of funding, so when we come back in July, we'll look at that overall position again.
Thank you. Councillor Finch.
Chair, I'm just trying to establish whether Ron is proposing that there is proportionate contribution based on the amount of money that is successful, each authority is successfully receiving and therefore spending. And I'm just trying to work out what is the correlation between those two, or other combinations that we should consider. As one example, should we consider population as the basis on which we should change the funding arrangement from, the voting arrangements from one person, one vote to a proportionate, I have 1.5 million people in Essex versus, oh, Ron, how many have you got in Southend?
Well, all I'm saying, David, I feel that sometimes Essex and Kent are paying far more.
I agree with that.
Right, than other authorities, and is a way forward to make it a more equal, fair share to fund the Secretariat, based on the monies that are allocated to each authority. So it doesn't come in terms of the population; it comes to the funding situation. That's all. Right. It's just let's see what it looks like. If it looks a silly idea, then fine. It's just an idea.
I better understand your point now, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I wonder whether, you know, we've been talking about how we review some of the processes, and this could, you know, this could form part of that discussion. It would seem sensible to me that, you know, it's a holistic overview of everything. So I think there is a request from this board to officers to look at that. If you all agree, do you agree?
Yes, yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Laura. I agree. Sorry, yes. So yes, so the intention is in July we will be bringing the budget back to reflect the latest position, and at that point we can look at alternative options.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we are asked to note the updated forecast revenue at-turn position for 2020-21 and a net underspend of £141,000. Thank you very much. Let's move on now, Suzanne, to item 20, which is an operations update. But before we do that, actually, I just wanted to again record my thanks to the team who have done an amazing job in a really, really difficult position. I know this is also true for all of the local authority officers across the board here. You know, you're all coping in an incredibly challenging time and under huge amounts of pressure and a load of things to be delivered. So I just wanted to say that before we then go on to the operations report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you from the whole of the Secretariat. I'm sure we all appreciate your support, and yeah, we'd like to send our thanks as well to the accountable body who we consider sort of very much part of our team and do so much for us too. So thank you, you guys too. I will keep it brief on the operations report. There was just a couple of things I wanted to report back on and flag. So I did say in the paper that we would report back on our annual performance review, which was conducted yesterday. So every LEP is required to have an annual performance review with representatives of the cities and local growth unit each year, as the word annual would imply. This has in previous years been a fairly formal process with chairs and at deputy director level and within CLGU. This year they have taken a different approach and kept it as light touch as possible, sort of having regard to the pressures that is on everybody really at the moment. So it was just a meeting with the Secretariat and our relationship manager Ian McNabb and representative from the accountable body. We'd been informed we have to submit a number of forms, as you can probably expect beforehand, and we'd been told that on the assessment of that information we'd submitted, we had met requirements in the 3 categories, which are delivery, governance and strategy. And we just talked through some of that information yesterday. I don't have a final position to give you. We're told that the timeline for giving us that is the 12th of April, as they're going through a national moderation process. And I think, as Lorna sort of indicated earlier, the core funding is contingent on our APR score being healthy, and similarly so is the GBF funding. We have flagged with government the fact that we're not getting confirmation on next year's GBF funding until the financial year has started isn't really acceptable, because it's creating delays to projects, and we'll continue to raise that as a risk with them. So moving on to risks, just a couple of things I wanted to flag there. We have increased the RAG rating around Hadlow College. For board members, just to remind you, Hadlow College went into educational administration quite a while ago now. We had paid LGF monies over to Hadlow, and we are still waiting for confirmation on the administrators, the BDO who are carrying out that role, as to whether that funding has been applied correctly and in line with our grant agreement. We haven't had that confirmation yet, so I just wanted to flag that that risk is sitting there. We continue to work, and I know that Ree and Lou and the accountable body are having conversations with BDO on a regular basis to try and seek that confirmation, but just to flag that that's still sitting there in the background, because I know we'd not raised it with you as a board specifically for a while. The other risks continue much as we had before. In November, we weren't in a national lockdown. As you may have noticed, we are now all in a national lockdown. So, you know, the COVID risk is still there. And there's still the fundamental risk of what is happening with LEPs beyond March 2022, which we still seek some answers from government. The LEP network is seeking governments. We need some certainty to allow us to plan as we talk about planning for budgets beyond next year, planning for investments, planning for interventions, considering how we can deliver the strategy which is coming to board. It's very difficult to make these plans when we don't know what the future of LEPs is likely to be and what our role's likely to be. So there is a lot of activity happening in the background, lobbying and sort of discussions with the LEP network and with Catalyst South. And so, yeah, just flagging that as, you know, our most kind of existential risk that exists. That was as far as I was planning to go with the operations report, but happy to take any questions that board members may have about the report.
Thank you, Suzanne. And just on the Met, not Met, just to be clear on that, on the review, it's a black and white issue, isn't it? It's
binary
either we meet
this
or we
year.
don't meet. Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't. There isn't
Yeah.
kind of
no grading.
any good, no grading. So just to be clear on that. And just, can I understand on Hadlow, what is the risk to us?
The risk, if the funding has not been applied correctly, there is a risk that MHCLG may seek to claw that back. And now that Hadlow doesn't exist in the way that it did exist, and the grant agreement did not novate over to the new provider at Hadlow, effectively we have no one that we could claw that back from. So this is why we need some indication from BDO as to whether that funding has been used correctly. The requirement there, I mean, there's requirements in our grant letter with them was to actually use it on the specific project, but the requirements from MHCLG is just that it be used for capital. So if it's not been used for capital, then MHCLG could claw that back, and we need to have discussions with MHCLG about this, because obviously if that had been done, it would be wouldn't comply with our requirements. It effectively would be, you know, a fraudulent activity by the college. Would it be fair to claw it back from us? We can't even start having those conversations until we've had confirmation from BDO as to what the situation is. So we're poised and ready to start having those conversations, but we need the confirmation from the BDO, and it's a long process for them to be going through and providing us with that information.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. How much is at risk?
Ree, can you remember off the top of your head how much we've got there that we think potentially is at risk?
I don't want to give you an exact figure because I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think we made fairly substantial investments, but that includes the likes of the investment in Ashford College, for example, where we know we've already held an accountability board there, so we know there's a physical asset there. I think it's more in relation to some of the other investments in capital equipment, where the accountable body have set aside funding in case that funding was recovered back from central government, but where we don't have that evidence of that equipment having been delivered.
Thank you. If we could
I think
get confirmation of how much
Yeah.
is at risk, would be helpful. I mean, we don't know whether
Yes.
it's £5 or £500,000 or £5 million.
Yes, I agree. It would be helpful. Stephanie, did you want to come in on this? And then I've got Councillor Goff.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, I can give an indicative figure that's somewhere in the region of £900,000 risk exposure.
Thank you. Councillor Goff.
Thank you. Firstly, I should just say, Chair, I will have to leave in a moment. I appreciate we're almost at last knockings in the meeting, but I will have to slip off in one moment. Just a quick question, something quite different, which is the SELEP framework agreement. Could I just check which county or unitary authorities have or have not signed it? I'm not entirely sure where we are on it, so that's part of the reason for asking.
I believe that KCC is our last outstanding.
I had an uncomfortable feeling that might be the case, which is why I was asking. So, okay, thank you. I'll take that back.
Thank you very much.
Forgive me, as I will slip off, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And indeed, Roger has anticipated my concern expressed the piece regarding confirmed framework agreements. East Sussex is quite proud to be the only authority that has been compliant completely since the origins, but it is an important factor in getting this complete. So thank you for Roger Goff for his help in ensuring this is done.
Thank you. Okay. So unless there are any other questions, we need to note the update on the assurance framework compliance monitoring at Appendix A and governance KPIs at Appendix B, and note the changes to the risk register at Appendix C. The date of the next meeting is the 12th of March 2021. I'm sure it will be a very full agenda too, and we will need to ensure that we get through all of those items as quickly as possible. There is no urgent business as far as I'm aware. On the A28 Surrey Lincoln Road confidential Appendix A, we've considered that item already, and I presumed that you had no questions on that. And I understand that there is no urgent exempt business unless anyone has anything to raise. No? Okay. So thank you very much. My thanks to all of you for a long meeting, but productive one. Good to have those discussions, good to have a indication of some of the things that we want to examine for the future. And I look forward to seeing you again. Oh, Councillor Woodley.
No, sorry, Chair. I just say I wonder whether the leaders could stay on afterwards for a quick chat about a concern that I've got. Nothing to do with the LEP at all, but just a quick chat.
Sorry, just to point out, if you do that, I will have to record it, or I'll have to leave, because otherwise I'll lose my recording of the meeting.
No, you can leave. It's nothing to do with the LEP at all.
No, if I leave, the meeting will then close down.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I'm the host, so you might not want to do it in this format. I'm just saying.
No, I don't mind in this format, but not the public format.
Yeah, so I have to be recorded. Is the only problem. You'll have to have me there, so it might not work, unfortunately.
Okay.
Sorry.
Maybe I'll send an email round to the leaders.
Right. Ron, have you got Microsoft Teams?
I do. Yes.
You've got Microsoft Teams?
Yes. Yeah.
You should be able to go to Microsoft Teams and then just invite people that you've got in your your address book.
But then you're assuming, David, that I've got the technology to do that. Yeah. So I'll email round and we'll have a quiz. Yep. Okay. Fine.
Okay.
If it's private and confidential, mark it as private and confidential as well.
No, it's not. It's just a concern I've got that we ought to be aware of. That's all.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.